Hello folks, welcome aboard this week. Hope you'll forgive me for recycling some footage from last week's sail, but this is a topic that I mentioned last week, and I've been meaning to talk about this for a while, but not really sure how to approach it. It occurs to me now that I need to break this down into two separate discussions. So the first part of this discussion I want to tackle today is the proliferation of anchor bands and rental mooring fields. And I'm going to try and do this without sounding like the old man yelling at the kids to get off his lawn, but simple truth of the matter is that this is a major change, and it's having a major demographic impact on the cruising fraternity. The second part I'll tackle in a separate video, and that is the new miracle of mooring rental by thumb, aka the internet mooring reservation system. That really deserves its own separate discussion, and my tone may tell you it's not something I'm a big fan of. But anyway, that's the topic for this week's discussion, and I'm hoping that this will turn into a discussion. I have nothing against people who think that these systems are improvements, and I'd really genuinely like to hear that perspective. My own perspective comes from my experience and my timeline, and I realize that somebody in a different economic situation or following a different trajectory or timeline may see this very differently. So please chime in and tell me I'm wrong. So this conversion of anchorage areas by local municipalities into rental mooring fields is one you've heard me rant about before. I realize that negativity doesn't sell, but this is a topic that I think needs consideration by all thoughtful sailors, as it pretends on the future of certainly at least one aspect of cruising. That aspect being my own preferred wandering rather than destination hopping and reserved travel. About a year ago, I had a conversation with one of the town fathers at Cuttyhunk, who told me that they were considering expanding their mooring fields into the relatively small, I'd say maybe 20% of the dredged basin that had been left open for boats to anchor in. This little corner of the harbor was popular with passersby, cruisers on their way north and south, folks who dropped in for the night because the weather turned against them, or just came there with the intention of enjoying a peaceful night's slumber in a fully sheltered harbor. Folks who either didn't have the means or the desire to shell out whatever the going rate happens to be. I don't recall exactly the number. It's either anywhere from $60 to $100 a night seems to be what most harbors around here get, but since I don't participate in municipal mooring rentals, as a matter of principle, I don't really know. Anyway, this small corner of the harbor was, in the eyes of the Cuttyhunk folks, justification each time they needed federal funds to dredge their channel or their harbor or their dock area or repair their breached seawall after winter storms. They could point to this area of the harbor and say that they were doing a public service by maintaining shelter for passing sailboats or sailors or powerboats or anyone else. Anyway, conversation was that they were thinking about taking over this area of the harbor, and I said, well, you take over that corner of the harbor, you'll add moorings to your field, but you won't have any anchorage. And he said, oh no, we're just going to spread out the moorings we have so that we can accommodate 90-foot boats. And I was shocked by that. I said, well, how many 90-foot boats do you get that try and get in a channel that at times is as little as 12 foot deep? And how many of those boats are really interested in coming to the inner harbor to anchor when a 90-foot boat probably has a 20-foot tender zoom in and out of the harbor with? Anyway, the conversation ended without any defined statement of what was going to happen, but when I showed up this spring, I saw that, well, it had already happened. So now that's the second 360-degree harbor around here that has been lost to what I prefer to view as municipal greed. Truth of the matter is, I mentioned in an earlier video that we lost Tajmu to a sort of three-way axis of local high-end landowners displeased with powerboat rafts and summer partiers, local authorities displeased with anchored boats not directly contributing to their funding, and misguided environmental groups who were convinced that boats coming in the summer and anchoring were killing off the eelgrass that was essential to the survival of the planet through its underwater production of oxygen. The same folks, by the way, didn't have an answer to how a permanently installed mooring dragging its chain around the bottom all year round was in any way less detrimental than a boat that visited a couple of times a week in the summer. But I digress. So we lost Tajmu to anchor bands that mysteriously went into place just before town rental moorings were installed. The Lagoon Pond in Vineyard Haven saw anchoring restricted more and more, and recent articles show that the environmental groups are being whipped into a frenzy about the need to preserve the eelgrass there as well. So I fully expect that 360-degree protected shelter will no longer be available to us. And, Cuttyhunk is now gone. So if you want to go to Cuttyhunk, have your wallet and your thumbs ready for going online, which, by the way, is a relatively difficult thing to do unless you have Starlink, because the cell phone reception on all the major carriers at Cuttyhunk is spotty at best. So unless you've made that reservation from your home office well in advance, probably going to get to Cuttyhunk and see a bunch of white balls occupying a space and told there's no room at the inn. Anyway, it's a bit more of a rant on this subject than most of you probably want to hear, but the simple truth of the matter is that the cruising world is a changing place, and you realize to some extent you either change with it or go away, but, well, suffice it to say that changes that take away that which could very reasonably be viewed as our own for the profit of unelected local officialdom tend not to sit well with those of us who have been coming out here and enjoying and visiting these places for nearly 50 years. So one of the things that I've noticed about each of these municipal mooring fields expansions into anchorage area is that it's always preceded by a ban on anchoring first. Before the mooring field is expanded to fill the space, there comes a buoy that says no anchoring, or a sign at the harbor entrance that says no anchoring. And of course, that's nearly always sold as an environmental advantage. But it's nearly universally the case that the first thing you need to do is make it so people have no alternative but to rent a mooring from you. Once you've established that that's the only way to visit a given place, then of course it's easier to justify the need to fill the former anchorage with more moorings. Though in reality, it's always the case that the number of nights that those mooring balls are occupied is a very small percentage of the actual year. What does happen is that an instant demographic change is produced among the visitors. Personally, I enjoy going to places with a diverse crowd visiting. Cruisers, young folks in boats they barely scraped enough money to get to the buy, let alone can they come up with $100 a night just to stop in a place. World voyagers who may not be familiar with the reservation system, and if they are, well, let's just say that $100 a night for 365 nights a year is a far different proposition than it would be for someone on a weekend, 2-day a week, 2-month a year jaunt. So what's happening here is, you might say on one hand, towns making use of a resource to augment their budget shortfalls and generate income from visitors. But on the other hand, it's not unlike a system that I only learned about a short time ago about our national parks here in the U.S. But I think from what I've read this year, this has changed somewhat. A buddy of mine who's an avid hiker and camper once told me that he was very excited to be going out to one of the major parks, I think it was Yellowstone, because he had won a lottery. I didn't know exactly what he meant, but he explained that in order to go camp in a national park, you had to get on a list in a lottery system where your number would be pulled if you were lucky, and if your number was pulled, you'd then be awarded certain dates of availability to go and visit the park. And only then could you make your travel vacation arrangements to do so. Well, folks, what's happening here with mooring reservations and the blocking of anchorage areas with moorings is moving in that same direction. It already is at the point where if you want to visit certain popular harbors, Martha's Vineyard, for example, in the summer, you'll find by June every popular weekend has been reserved. There's no way that you can assure yourself of getting a spot there. You can still show up and hope that someone else, perhaps someone coming upwind when you're going downwind, may have just decided not to show up, but you won't know till they get there. And some might say, well, that's no different than the old days when you might show up and find that all the moorings were taken by people that got there before you. And to that I say you're correct, but that's why, for anyone with a sense of seamanship, before you set out to one of those locations, you would say, well, okay, there may not be a mooring, but the forecast wind for this weekend is of a direction where the available anchorage is safe. And so if there's no mooring, I'll simply anchor. Once that option is removed, one leg of the three-legged stool of seamanship has been taken away from you. You now either don't go and take the risk of being anchored off a lee shore or someplace undesirable in the potential wind, or you go and you take your chances. And again, perhaps violate another tenet of seamanship, which is have an idea of the anticipated weather and how well you'll be sheltered in your choice of destination. So I've identified the problem or concern, that of municipal rental mooring fields multiplying like cockroaches and essentially taking over former public navigation waterways. But what's the solution? Well, I don't have one. I can tell you what my solution is, and it's born of a sort of Yankee stubbornness that says that if I'm not wanted in a place, then I don't want to be there. And as I've outlined here, if my idea of navigation and what that entails is not welcome, then I consider that neither am I. Simply put, I don't want to be in a place that restricts those who have access to that place to those who can pay at a turnstile to get in. I don't go to Disneyland either. But for many, that's just not realistic. Limited time, only a certain number of days a year off. You may essentially have a very different idea about how to deal with this issue. And that's why I present this more as a discussion than anything else. So thanks for coming aboard this week, and please feel free to like and share and comment, and hopefully we'll put our heads together and figure out a way around this conundrum.